Welcome back, guys. Perry, know it's been a while, but hey, might as well just start coming back to this. Today we're going to do scenario, what if World War III broke out in 1950? So let's just get started. So for this timeline to, I suppose, actually happen, we're going to need a few changes. First of all, the U.S. President Truman is going to be a bit more, let's just say, trigger happy, and so will Mao and Stalin, I guess. And everyone's just more willing to start a war. Second thing is that we're going to say nuclear bombs were not invented yet. So that will be a later invention. It's just not invented yet. All right. So a world war can actually happen at this time between the West versus the commies. And as expected, it will be starting over Korea, just like in our timeline. So just like in our time, the early Korean War just goes the same. The U.S. or not the U.S. The North Koreans they will be barreling down the south, surrounding Busan, I think it is. And America, just like in our timeline, joins the war and they start sending soldiers. We're also going to say that because there were no nukes, Japan they just surrender like a couple months later, perhaps. And I don't actually know if they were in the war at this point, but there were U.S. troops in Japan, and MacArthur, which took part in this war, was at that point located in Japan. So not sure, but anyways, the U.S. they pushed back the North Koreans, just kick them out of South Korea, just basic Korean War stuff. Not really anything new here, and they will push up to the Chinese border. So that would look something like this. I think it was they got pretty far. Um, and now sitting at this border, we obviously know what comes next, which is that China, who just got out of their own civil war, is going to intervene in this civil war. Anyways, so Chinese soldiers in North Korea, just typical stuff. But it is in this timeline where we see the first major difference happen, which is that Mao decided not only to invade the Korean Peninsula, which just yeah they'll roll over that, but or maybe he's like right here by this point. He also decides that in this point, might as well go for Taiwan too. So China, let's say they've been preparing for a bit, and they made some pretty big landings on Taiwan, but and they get pretty far, they land, and yeah, but obviously they take a bunch of casualties here, and they just flop on the beaches. The U.S. was prepared for this. Let's be honest, they're not taking Taiwan in any real scenario. But unlike that, in our timeline, they will still succeed very much in Korea. So now the second big difference in this timeline happens, which is that um, the Chinese they have not only attacked Taiwan and American ships, but they sort of just escalated this war outside of Korea, basically by accident. And the U.S., Mr. Harry S. Truman, he is not going to take kindly and sees this as a big opportunity to get the communists out of China. So he basically like makes a kind of a declaration, basically just saying like, yeah, we're at war with China. He calls the Communist Party illegitimate and just commits to a full scale war. Now he's not going to land on the U.S., not the Chinese coast just for now. Although if there's any islands, he will probably take that, Mr. Harry Truman. But yeah, he's making slow progress. So the first target would most likely be Korea itself. A lot more soldiers are sent to Korea. Mr. Truman also was able to get some of these Western nations, mainly the British involved in the war, to a not they're not going to send their full armies or full navies, but It will play a mostly supporting role, and once again, just kind of join this crusade on communism. And I have to draw on the British Empire. Just give me a second. So I'm pretty sure the British Empire looked something like this. India got independence, and so did, I think, most of the Middle East was basically independent, although they still controlled the Suez. But yeah, the British are in the war, which means there will also be fighting in Burma. Not much, but you know. And the war just kind of slows down for a little bit. The U.S. makes slow progress, making another offensive to Pyongyang, but Chinese hordes are sort of there, making it a little slow. They also land in Shandong and begin to push out into this region, approaching Qingdao and attempting to make a foothold on the Chinese coast. Another landing happened at Port Arthur, and another one in this island down here. And well, it's kind of becoming clear to Mr. Stalin that the U.S. is not going to back down until the communists in China are completely destroyed. So Stalin has a decision to make, which is what he does next. Does he let the U.S. just do their thing in China, destroy the Communist Party, or does he strike now? And considering the thumbnail and the title, I think we all know what Mr. Joe Stalin's gonna pick. So, Stalin, he makes his move, and he unilaterally declares the formation of Western Germany illegal and the U.S. war in China illegal, and he just makes just and yeah, he just uses this as his chance, sort of, and just destroy Western Europe, as World War III has efficiently begun, as one small proxy war has turned into all of this. So yeah. So before we get on Asia, let's talk about Indochina for a minute. Now, there were some communists here, and they will be revolting against the French colonial occupiers. Now, there were also some nationalists, I think, but it was mostly communist, and they will be revolting, and they were mostly let's just say for the sake of the scenario that they are mostly concentrated around northern Vietnam and sort of are able to consolidate the north, right? Now, this will be a front that the French will have to hold. Although right now the communists, they have the big advantage because China is literally right there. Over here in Burma, not much happens, but there are maybe some small Chinese advances across the border. But overall, this is good news for China that the Soviets have joined, as the West will be a little bit more focused on this. And the U.S. president, he's committed. He's committed to a war. This is the one chance that they will have to destroy communism once and for all and establish America as the top dog. So, pretty much immediately, these positions become a lot harder for the U.S. to hold long term. I don't think China would recapture it right away, but it would be inevitable. And they even start to push back in the Korean front, although this is kind of turning into a meat grinder. Again, they start moving back and start reaching over to Seoul, although they fail to capture it by this point because it's just too much. I believe there was also a revolt in Indonesia at the time, and Malaysia. Malaysia we can also draw in here. And not much is going to happen in Malaysia because this is just hell to fight in. Indonesia, though, I would suspect that they would probably just force the Dutch to leave Indonesia, since I don't think that the Dutch could even hold on to this, especially since the Soviets are about to start making some moves. And speaking of the Reds, they start making headway across into Germany. They reach the this little river here and basically just cut off Germany from Denmark, which is bad news for Denmark as Soviets start pushing north. The Soviets' second offensive mainly comes through Czechoslovakia into Bavaria, in which they also do pretty severe damage. And yeah, the West really was not all too prepared for this at all. Now, Austria is also invaded. Vienna is put under threat, and it looks like Vienna is about to be taken, and it is. I don't know what I'm saying. As that is the first European capital that would fall, I believe, in this war, which is a big thing. Very big thing. Very massive thing. Alright, and the Soviets, they continue their pushes into Bavaria. The Danish front a little slower because this is a slightly easier area for the West to defend. But the Soviets just have just sheer numbers on their side. And the West will have a very hard time. They take Wilhelmshaven. I think that's what it's called. I played too much Void 4. It's probably not called that. And they push over to Switzerland, cutting off Bavaria from the rest of Germany, as the rest of the Western forces are forced to sort of flee across the Alps. Now, whether or not Austria would actually let them is kind of clear to say, since Austria probably just wants to be neutral, all things considered. So they may actually attack the West, depending on what happens here. The only real place where the West is winning is actually surprisingly in the Balkans, where Soviets haven't gotten as many soldiers, and the Greek army is pushing into Bulgaria. Not an exceptional rate, but Soviets are not really focused down here. Over here in Armenia, the Soviets also pushed down into Armenia, and yeah, just kind of give Turkey a little run for their money. Now, we're gonna start seeing that as the Red Army starts pushing, Western Europe is kind of in a panic. The U.S. is desperately sending soldiers over to slow this down, but it's just not. It's gonna be very tricky. Eventually, they push out into this area of Germany, and all that's left is the Rhineland, in which the West attempts to make a defensive line. They also push into the Netherlands, capturing most major cities, but once again being stopped at the Rhineland. Denmark is invaded once again, and the moment Soviet troops cross in 5 hours, the Danes surrender. Norway is Norway's just Norway. I don't know why I mentioned it. Now, by this point, we're gonna start seeing this war perhaps escalate, mainly in that the Soviets are trying to get these guys involved in the war, which would make operations in the Mediterranean a little easier. They're able to convince Yugoslavia, but not Albania, which Albania they realize they can't really do much, but Yugoslavia, after enough pressure, Tito decides to join this war for global communism. Austria is continuing to get invaded as the Soviets consolidate their lines, and the West they do a decent job holding the Alps, but once again, just the sheer numbers, and also the likely, it's just not gonna, really not gonna work. Also, Yugoslavia joining here makes the Greek situation harder as they push along and start to threaten Thessaloniki. Even Bulgaria begins to push back with the help of more Soviet reinforcements, and the Greek army is not doing so well. They start cutting it up into Thrace, while the siege of Istanbul is about to begin as the Soviets line up here and basically just sort of ends any immediate threat from the Balkans for now. All right, so another nation will also be joining the Allies in this timeline, and that'll be Finland, who decides to tear up that Soviet treaty. And I don't know how they would get to war, but they probably just would at some point. The Finns do surprisingly well since the Soviets were not prepared. Viipuri is seized, and Finns reach this lake here, which is kind of a problem for the Soviets. They also would push across the Kola as Norway would try to reach Murmansk. Now, this is really the only area of the West we'll be able to put pressure on for the time being, as the Soviets are still trying to break through these two lines, the Alpine line and the Rhine line. Eventually, after atrocious casualties and about a month of fighting, the bank of the Rhine in Moselland is taken. And yes, I know these names because of Hoi 4. Belgium is entered, and it looks like for the third time in a century, France is going to get invaded from the north. As France begins to have flashbacks, Brussels falls as the West is desperately defending. More and more U.S. soldiers are getting pushed, but the Soviets are also having a very rough time, considering their supply lines are huge. As this is really the moment that will decide for the Soviets whether they can win. They will push in. The Ardennes are rough to break through, but their sheer bodies, they are able to just barely push into France. As well as this area of the Rhinelands, Western soldiers retreat back. The French are able to stop them in Alsace for a bit, but where there are a lot less soldiers are around Venice, as the Soviets just have a huge breakout here, conquer this entire area, um, and yeah, that's going to be rough in Italy for the West. They push out into the fields. This is still a very mountainous area, so this would not be easy. Huge casualties from the Soviet side here. I'd assume like the KD ratio by this point is probably like 3-1. But this is their chance. Now or nothing. They reach the western side of the Mediterranean, and Italy begins to consolidate their lines around here. I don't think the Soviets can reach Rome. They're not going to do that. Yeah, they just push. They're only barely stopped at the French Alps as France is feeling the heat again for the third time. Now, a quick state of Asia. Seoul, the North Koreans have reached Seoul with help of China. This is just the meat grinder. And the U.S. and other news has set up their blockade of the communist world. Now, the communist world, unlike World War II Germany, they were a bit more self-reliant, saying that considering their block is greater and they can also like trade across land, but you know, it's still something. As U.S. ships just blow the shit out of Chinese coastal cities. They're not going to dare land in China, but, you know, there's something to keep in mind. By this point, most of Vietnam has been retaken, or taken by the communists, as the only holdout is in the south, in Saigon, which sort of just becomes like the Stalin, like this, like Seoul was already Stalingrad. This is like Leningrad, if I had to guess. I don't know. Now, in terms of escalation, I don't know who else would join. I mean, maybe Latin America would join at some point, just kind of help the U.S. in a supporting role. I definitely think Brazil would join, like they did in World War II, as well as probably Mexico and Cuba. But I don't really think these nations can like do much at all because they're just very weak. Ugh. So the communists they keep pushing in Greece, but the Greeks are actually able to defend their mountainous homeland quite well. Same thing with the Turks, as the Allies are sort of able to lock down this front, and Really goes to the same in the north. They try to do some Germany maneuvers, but their supply lines are really stretched thin, and the Allies are just using their sheer air power to just bomb everything. Luxembourg falls, but and even though the Soviets appear to be making gains, capturing a lot of French industry, which is located in the north, by this point, an armada of Allied soldiers are here to defend. And eventually, after enough air attacks and the Soviets ground to a halt, the West do indeed launch a minor counteroffensive, retaking a lot of key areas for France. By this point, the Finnish, who were doing well, are beginning to get pushed back. A division around Leningrad has been deployed and just starts pushing into Finland. And the Finns are not going to do so great this time. The Soviets begin to push through Helsinki as they really are not getting the support they need, but they're doing the best they can. Also, it's probably fair to say that by this point, the U.S. would have landed in the Kolin by this point, which is pretty huge for the U.S. if they are able to land here, as that puts this region of the Soviet Union in danger. A lot of danger, yeah. The West pushed back into Belgium. Brussels is retaken. As a sort of front line begins to stabilize around the Netherlands and Belgium, mostly following most of the major rivers, I think. And it looks something like this. Wallonia is still mostly in Soviet hands, as well as the heart of Germany. But Belgium's getting destroyed. I feel bad for Belgium. They're not having a very fun time in this war. So this is probably where it would stay for a couple years, maybe not years, but like a couple months. Not really much movement, except perhaps in some peripheral regions, where you just sort of see the U.S. Kind of take advantage of this weakened Soviet Union, and begin to pump up the war industry up to World War II levels. Their industry was a lot bigger than the Soviets, and while the communists have the manpower advantage on paper, um, it's rough. Not that simple. When your industry is shit, you can't really do too much. Economies win wars. All right. In the West, they sort of concoct a plan. All right, so the West they concoct a plan to sort of make the next move, and so will the Soviets. So we're going to see two war plans enacted here by both the Soviets and the West. So the Western plan will be the land in the Soviet Far East in several locations, and the Communist plan will just be to push, mainly in trying to knock out a few of the smaller fronts, mainly in the south, and the Communist Chinese will plan a huge offensive into Korea at this point. So, whose plan gets launched first? Well, it will be the Soviets. A frankly massive amount of Soviet soldiers, maybe say about 500,000, begin to push into this region of Turkey. They take advantage of some Kurdish disloyalty, we can say, and have an easier time pushing into this region. And the communists and the Greeks start to fail. Now they beg Albania to join this war, but they just say no. The Soviets just continue to do their thing, push, push. And Albania by this point is getting pretty scared that the Reds might just invade them, but the Soviets don't. They push down and eventually besiege the Athenian region, as a massive success for the Soviets. The Soviets also began to push across the Turkish coast, taking several coastal cities in Turkey. Now, pushing across Anatolia will be tough, so they are ramping up pressure on Constantinople. Um, they approach the city closer, but the heart of the city is still deep in Turkish command. By this point, the West, they have probably crossed the Rhine into the Netherlands, since probably the easiest region to retake, liberating Amsterdam, but they're still moving pretty slowly. But the main part of the West plan is going to begin here in Asia. Three landings are prepared. One small landing in this peninsula up here. I'm not sure what it's called, but they fear they get very little resistance, and eventually just push up and kind of just occupy this whole region of Siberia. Next up, they land in this area near Sakhalin, and they land in the areas around it too that are slightly lightly defended. And they consolidate their front line, push out a little bit, as this region has very, very few Soviets. Next up, in this area, they would attempt to go for Vladivostok, but once again, they're not going to go straight for it. They do land some troops directly in it, but they land troops around it as well. And the initial invasion actually gets pushed back in Vladivostok, but thankfully for the West, they are able to push out and gain a foothold in this region of Siberia, and eventually are able to retake Vladivostok from the battered defenders. Eventually, they push up this railway to Krasnoyarsk, and I think there's a city right here. And yeah, they even crossed into China a little bit, into some regional villages. But the Chinese do put an end to this, as the U.S. mechanized offensives push further and further into Siberia. Eventually, a whole front line, I guess, gets assembled here. Another small landing would probably take place in this area, as this whole sea is just taken over by the U.S. So both sides, they had limited success with their offensives. The Soviets and the Chinese. Oh yeah, the Chinese. Right. We gotta do their offensive. Their biggest is just push Korea. As fewer and fewer soldiers are here, they start moving around Seoul. As yeah, the city just becomes hell on earth. Eventually gets cut off, but they're getting coastal supplies, and yeah, the city. You do not want to be living in Seoul right now. It's just what I'm gonna say. It is probably the one, just a hellish fight scene, right? It's like Stalingrad, but like two times worse, with like a lot more bodies. So now we kind of see the point in the war where, while yes, both sides had their successes, we start to see a main issue with the Soviets, which is that they just cannot outproduce the West. They just can't do it. They just can't. And so we sort of see some issues for the Reds. They get pushed back in the Netherlands as the Dutch fields are being retaken. They move north and eventually begin to reach the border of Germany. By this point, this region has taken a huge amount of damage, but it's a very rough push. There's still millions on millions of soldiers guarding everywhere, but they make progress. Eventually, with the Soviets at risk of envelopment, they pull back from Belgium fully, and the West begins to push back into the Rhineland. Pretty much just, once again, just ruining this region forever. A bunch of damage. Every major city in the Rhineland is a hard fought battle, but the West just slowly clogs forward, just with sheer air and mechanized power. And it's at this point, remember at the start of the video, I said that nukes were not invented yet. Certain Manhattan Project, probably like over a decade later, begins to take work. But it's gonna take a while. It's gonna take a while. Don't expect the nuke to be in this war for now, as the U.S. sticks to conventional means, pushing into Italy, and the Soviets just yeah they're not. I'm just gonna cut it short. They're not holding on to Italy, and they fall back to the Alps. Now it's pretty clear to most people that Soviets they are not winning this long term. The West is already pushing back into Siberia. They are taking swaths of territory, not valuable territory, but um, Soviets are not really fighting back here. And they start to try to get other nations to join, like Iran. And eventually, remember the coup that happened here? There was I believe there was some form of chaos in Iran. Iran would have probably joined the war. I mean, I don't know enough about Cold War history, dude. But let's just say that there's a civil war in Iran, and Soviet troops do a funny, and Iran is dragged into this, which means the Soviets are now have a new front to deal with. Western soldiers push up into and begin to have eyes on Tehran, as even this little Turkish offensive begins to get pushed back a lot. Now it's by this point where we start to see some instability. Now, there would have been some communist movements, obviously, in the third world mostly. Also in France and Italy, there were likely some communist sympathies moving around, but it's pretty clear that this war is a mess. It has not been fun for anyone involved. And while the West is not making amazing progress, they are making slow progress. It has become clear that maybe Mr. Joe Stalin is not doing so well. And it's at this moment that around 1955, Joe Stalin died, probably. After being at war for 5 years, we start to see major problems in the Warsaw Pact. As Stalin died, different movements start to rise up. One of them, one major one, takes place in Budapest. Another one in Prague, and another Polish rebellion takes place. Now, these rebellions, on their own, they're not much. The Red Army is able to mop these with some challenges, but once again, there's a huge amount of resistance brewing in this region, and it could potentially be a problem. Now, the West is seeing that just their strategy of pushing into Germany is not going too well. Germany's too urban. There's too much chaos here. It's just a bloodbath. There's likely been millions of people that have died in Germany. 3 world wars. It's not been nice on the nation. So the West decides on another different strategy and another naval invasion, but this time instead of in Asia, which actually has sort of been a standstill by this point. The Chinese probably did push back a bit. But Seoul, let's say that China has finally taken back Seoul after all these years for like the the third time Seoul has fallen in this whole Korean War. Yeah, Korea is not doing well. This is probably the most brutal area of fighting Korea. There's been, or one of the most brutal, there's been millions on millions of deaths. Even in our timeline, there was a lot of people who died from this. But this is even worse. It's the whole country. It's just complete mess. It's mostly not even Koreans fighting. It's foreigners on Korean soil. And eventually, for the second time, The U.S. has resorted to a few small ports, but it's fine because they're not too focused on Asia. They're focused on here in Eastern Europe. As another plan is launched, and this time it will be. Now they can do a couple things, um, but there's a southern, just like the invasions of Italy in World War II. They have a plan, and that was and this is invading Yugoslavia. They land in several regions, mainly Montenegro, as well as in Istria. Now, this was actually a real operation in World War II, I believe, called Operation Armpit, which was to land in this region for the Allies, or mainly just the British, to prevent the Soviets from taking over this region. So they're just going to bring that strategy back, kind of doing this timeline, as Yugoslavia is sort of just like they're not weak underbelly, but they're more of this region has been a little softer. Most Soviets are fighting in Germany, and a major counteroffensive is launched in Greece. Yeah, most importantly, the West, through some CIA shenanigans and whatever, uh, since got soldiers in Albania. Yeah, that was certainly a move. Now, Albania has been fortified to the teeth by this point, just fortified to the teeth. Um, but this will be a hard area for the West to take over, but they have consolidated a greater front line by doing this. As Albania just kind of falls, they just collapse. The Soviets destroy their government and just kind of take over the place, what's ever left. As yeah, they push over the Western armies push through Zagreb, and the Soviets are pretty desperate to contain it. But once again, more major rebellions take place, as many in these territories actually see the West as liberators almost. Other revolts happen in Western Croatia and Hungary again, this time in other cities in the West. As and while the West can't really link up with these right away, they do pose as valuable distractions that the Soviets have to deal with, and they really can't. These are big problems, and the Soviets do have to divert some forces to just clean this mess up. There's also less soldiers in Finland by this point. Finland been pushed back after some brutal fighting, and eventually retakes Vipoli, and the Soviets move back, defending Leningrad. Now, by this point, there's a new leader, Mr. Khrushchev, in charge of the Soviet Union, and he inherits the Soviets that are not doing so well. They're not doing so well. They're just not. All right, this is not well. The West moves back into Thrace, starts taking over lands in Turkey, as the Soviets are just really like not having a good time. They're just not. Sevastopol is also a city that the West actually attempts a landing in, but actually surprisingly they actually fail, which is something. But it doesn't really matter. Yugoslavia is really not doing well. There's different movements here, and eventually, much like in World War II, let's just say that perhaps there was a anti-communist coup or rebellion in Belgrade, as a new er, I'm actually no, it's stupid. And yeah, much like in World War II, the country just falls apart. Just falls apart. Anti-Soviet movements also break out in Romania, breaking around Bucharest, as well as in the Bulgarian region, which just kind of collapses this area even more. The Greek invasion is going well, pushing into Athens and making another landing in Thessaloniki, attempting to sort of just consolidate the Balkans, in which they are succeeding in. pushing very far out and eventually just liberating this entire region. The Reds do attempt to take off some heat by pushing into Germany again, into Stuttgart, and pushing up to the Rhine, but the Soviets, this is far after their pride, and even though they retake some cities, it's not going to do anything. The West quickly pushes back harder than ever, reaching this Kiel area, and yeah, it's not going so hot. It's just not going hot at all. Bavaria too. So the West they push to Macedonia, Bulgaria, as Soviets. It's pretty clear to them that they're falling. Well, yes, the rebellions they're mostly able to deal with through sheer force. The harder they put down rebellions, the worse. Well, the more people want to revolt. It's not going to work. So bigger revolts begin to happen in all over the Soviet Union. This time in the Baltic states, and even some protest within Russia and Ukraine and Belarus. And the Soviet, and it really does start to take a toll on the Red State. China is not nearly as exhausted. Well, they are, but um, the war's been slightly less intense, except for their coastline, which has been bombed. But once again, a lot of people have died because of Mao by this point. He's still trying his great leap forward. And yeah, it's going to be rough. There's a little more sympathy for Mao because Mao can just blame the blockade on why things are going bad. But it's still still rough, and Chiang Kai-shek's not so popular. But there's just a lot of pressure. The West would eventually kick the Soviets fully out of Germany, and eventually an army in Denmark would get encircled and cut off. Giving to push into Austria. They finish off Slovenia, and this is anyone who knows anything about war. This is not a holdable line. Germany against the fall, Czechia, as everywhere the West is advancing, they're hailed as almost liberators of sorts, particularly in the newly conquered territories by the Soviets. The West see very little resistance, and of course this would take years, but this video is probably long enough. There's not really a point in mapping this. What really matters is around maybe like a year in where the West sort of comes to the Soviet border. Now we're gonna have to now when it comes to what they do next, pushing into Russia is not going to be fun. It is not going to be fun at all. It's going to be a miserable operation pushing into Russia, but what else is there? So they're gonna do it. Their first target is Leningrad. They push deeper, but they fail to take the city right away. And so they sort of do what World War II Germany did, and they push. They just push out into different areas of the Soviet Union, attacking industry. But this time it's them who have the supply issues. But they can overpower it. They push up into the more loyal Baltic states. As the West is Stalin tries the same tactics that he used against the Germans, but it's not going to work against the West. They move forward. Odessa is cut off and eventually taken. The second landing at Crimea happens, and this area falls. As the weak Russian underbelly in Ukraine is collapsing. It's just collapsing. I would assume the West might push like around here before maybe winter kicks in. Now, unlike World War II, this situation is a lot more hopeless, and I don't really know what the Soviets would do. And if I'm being fully honest, I think there would probably be a coup by this point, and the Soviet Union would surrender. So yeah. Now all that's left is China, and oh boy, China. This is gonna be rough. The West starts their operations into South Korea, and Mao basically just delusionally thinks that he can actually beat the West and just fights on. Millions will die in China. Shandong will be pushed in. Qingdao. So will Port Arthur. And they will push into Korea, the West. They'll push out into Manchuria as this is becoming rough. But I told you there was. Oh shit! I fuck. I alluded to nukes earlier. Just completely forgot about them. All right. Well, let's say that they were planning, just like in World War II, they were planning to use nukes on the Soviets, but as one last show of force, a nuclear bomb flies from Korea and lands straight in Beijing on Mao's head, and another one lands in Shanghai. The West is now holding back millions dead, just completely destroyed. The West is facing tons of condemnation for this, but well, it's gonna be rough. But this is just yeah. I'm not gonna go over it too long. We already know what happens. By this point, I think the French would have probably just left their colonies. There's not really a point in holding on to this anymore. And they would have made plans to leave after the war. I don't know. And the West, after years and years of pushing, finally China surrenders. China surrenders until the Mongolia. So this is the West world. This is the world that the West. This is the West world, and they are free to do whatever they want with it. So take a look at that peace tree now. And here it is. This is the post-war map of World War III, and let's just go piece by piece, see what the West has done. About I don't even know how many people would have died. I mean, Germany and Korea alone probably would have been at least in in the 8 digits, probably. In Korea, in Germany alone, at least is that 8 digits? Yeah, it would definitely. I'm just saying it would definitely be like at least in the 8 figures, the death tolls in Korea and Germany alone. All right, but with the rest of the world combined, U.S. unlike in the other two wars, they would have lost millions of soldiers, which would probably scar the U.S. forever. Russia lost millions. China, tens of millions. Japan, millions. France and Britain, maybe slightly less, but still millions. All these other Eastern European states. The bigger ones like Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, mainly Poland, Ukraine, millions. Hundreds of thousands in the smaller ones. And yeah, it's a complete disaster. So let's just a lot of countries are depopulated. Germany will never be the same, and may even be a bit more vengeful after. Maybe they would have been not not so forgiveful for World War II after what just happened to them. They may be more warlike, more military spirited, you know. But yeah, let's just see what happens. So, um, in Eastern Europe reorganized, republics liberated, um, Germany reunited, and just the simple stuff. Greece, feel like they earned this expansion. And just the basic stuff you'd expect. But let's move over to Russia now. Finland and Norway. Yes, Norway took a chunk, but mostly Finland have taken a huge chunk out of Karelia. I don't think they would actually be giving Murmansk too. Just makes sense that they would get the Kola. Just to destroy Russian power in the Arctic, as Greater Finland has been achieved. The Baltics also expand into Russia, as two new Russian states are created. Oh, maybe three. Yeah, three, yeah. So this first one right here, this is just the Russian Federation. Release, they will have to pay war reparations, probably deindustrialized. Basically, just get the Germany treatment or the Japan treatment. They also have a bunch of breakaries, Tatarstan, um, this southern Chernozol, I think it is, and obviously all the Caucasus released. Central Asia released. These regions probably don't have a lot of Western supervision. The U.S. is probably just too tired to care. They're mainly focused on Russia itself. And speaking of Russia, next we got the Siberian Occupation Zone, which is a second government, which is going to be separate from this, just as kind of an attempt to destroy Russia after what they've done. Also, this is just taken by the U.S. I mean, they might as well take some after all they've done. Now, this region, the Vladivostok Republic, probably is going to be called, is also Sakhalin is taken by Japan. Yeah. This is the third government. It's just going to be more of a local government. It's going to be like Korea. It's going to be reformed. All these are going to be reformed into democracies under close American supervision. Eastern Europe probably, if they depends. If they were taken over by the rebels, then probably they're not under that close of a watch. But yeah, the U.S. is mainly focused on Russia. But the biggest loser, not really the biggest loser, but a big loser is China, which doesn't exist and is replaced with, well, communist China destroyed as a new Taiwan just takes over China under Chiang Kai-shek. Now, this is already controversial enough. They don't really like Chiang Kai-shek as seeing him as a Western puppet, which he probably is. But even worse, China has lost a bunch of territory. Mongolia, democratic, allegedly, and is expanding. Another breakaway state in East Turkestan and Tibet. And Korea even gets an occupation zone over this region of Manchuria. So, also, there's a new Thai state in the south. Vietnam is just abandoned. They're not going to fight over that. Malaysia's probably abandoned too, short after the war. Same with Burma. Um, Japan has probably gained some autonomy. And yeah, this is just the Western world. How long will American hegemony last? Probably for, honestly, at least a century. The only nation that's really left is China, I guess, but they're just destroyed. I mean, depends on how hard the U.S. tries to keep control over China. But other than that, there really is no threat. Russia is a complete joke now. Europe is too small. I think it's about to die. And India is too poor right now. They might get richer later, but and yeah, this is gonna be mostly peaceful. This world, the Europe and Asia is gonna spend decades rebuilding. Nations like Germany and Korea are probably permanently scarred. Korea probably lost like at least a third of their population from all that. China is going to be scarred forever. Russia is scarred forever. All the birth crises in these nations just way worse. And the only nation left with a functioning industry really is, beside maybe Britain, is the U.S. Uh, was it worth it? I don't know. What a victory it was. See you guys in the next one. Make sure you like and subscribe. I don't know why you stayed for this long, but if you did, I genuinely love you.